What's up, guys? The Wannabe Racer back again for another season of Playing Bikes. This time we are kicking things off with the 2019 edition of the Paris to Ancaster bike race, Ontario's unofficial spring classic, featuring a 70-kilometer course that takes you on paved and gravel roads, gravel rail trail, and through some straight-up off-road sections. It is always a fun and challenging event. With 2019 being the 26th edition, Paris Ancaster was gravel racing before gravel racing was cool. It also has become quite prestigious for the lucky few who actually are racing the event. But for the majority of the well over 1,000 participants, including myself, Paris Ancaster is about just finishing and giving yourself an early season test. This was my third participation in the race, and this time I had set a goal of breaking the 3-hour mark, and was confident despite some poor training in March and April. Since this is a bit of a long race report, let's kill some time by going into some of my history at the event. The first time I participated in Paris Ancaster was back in 2012. I was pretty new to cycling. I think I really only had been riding my mountain bike for about a year, and that was basically only maybe 20 to 30 kilometer rides on the weekend while at university. Somehow I got it in my mind that I could ride 70 kilometers no problem. Bit of foreshadowing, I had no idea about nutrition or what I was really getting into. It really wasn't long into the event before I was bonking and dealing with cramps. I was probably already dealing with cramps before the halfway mark of the race, so it was going to be a long day. In the end, I did crawl across the finish line as one of the very last finishers. I think I have the badge of honor there that I can go back to the results that year and find my name on the very last page. Going forward to my most recent participation, which I guess was either 2016 or 2017, I had been riding a lot more and came in a pretty good shape, I thought, and was riding really strongly. And I still believe that I would have broken the 3-hour mark that year if it hadn't been for a saboteur who cut down trees across one of the rail trails before the race. So when we got there, everybody had to get off their bikes, climb over the trees, and with so many people, it just became a backlog. So now that we're caught up with my history, let's jump back to the 2019 edition. Like any race, the start is fast. People are excited, looking to improve their position. And as you bomb down the first gravel section and into this section, there are some big potholes that can cause you to clearly eject a bottle, as you can see on the left, or even flat or break a wheel. Good way to ruin a day early on. I also couldn't imagine losing your bottles 5 minutes into an event that's going to take you 2.5, 3 hours. Yeah, and then we all snake on to the first section of rail trail. This is probably where I made my biggest mistake on the day. Figured I'd use as a chance to improve on what I thought was a poor starting position, get past some of the other riders in the wave, and make sure I didn't have to dismount and walk up the first off-road climb so that I wasn't stuck behind a lot of other riders having to dismount. So I jumped on the wheel of a couple fast kids, and in the end I probably pushed it too hard for this section and would end up regretting it as the race rolled on. So after the first section of rail trail along the Grand River, you make a right-hand turn up this pretty steep and loose climb. There's quite a lot of big loose rocks, which is what causes a lot of people to have to dismount. I was definitely happy to have the gearing I did on my bike. I was running a 42 chainring up front with an 1142 cassette in the back, and I definitely used all of that range to get up that climb. I think this is deserving of its video of its own, but I was riding my custom Cannondale CAD X cyclocross bike and running 37C WTB Riddler tires. I don't have the exact PSI for all you gravel nerds, but it was probably around 47 front and 50 in the rear. Of course, running that tubeless, and I think that felt perfect for the day. So I think one of the things that makes Paris to Ancaster a truly special event is the course. As I mentioned before, it takes you across 70 kilometers of paved roads, gravel rail trails, down gnarly mud chutes, across farmers' fields, and down country lanes. One of the real unique things is that there are a lot of sections that are on private property that the local landowners allow the race to run across, which means you get to ride sections and see things that you can't any other day of the year. Definitely takes a community to run a cycling event, and Paris Ancaster is no exception. Just want to take a moment to thank the organizers, the hundreds of volunteers that help out along the course at the start and finish, handing out registration packages, handing out food to finishers, and along the course marshalling, as well as thanking the local landowners who allow the riders to come across their property one day of the year, oftentimes cutting up their grass or ruining their driveway. Without them, this race wouldn't be as unique and as special as it is. So in these early sections of the race, I thought I was making good time, keeping a good average pace, moving up through riders, not getting passed by too many others, and generally still feeling pretty good. Little did I know that I would probably pay for these extra efforts later on in the race. But at this point, I thought if I maintained a good pace, I could put some time in the bank for if I did start suffering later on. But I was definitely enjoying riding this route, especially a section like this, going down a bit of a sweeping downhill gravel section isn't something you often get to do in Ontario. Since this was such a long race, I do have a lot of footage, and it's always hard to cut it down to the most interesting bits, and of course even more difficult to say things that you, the viewer, are going to find interesting and enjoy hear me talking about. So here we are, staring at some butts and riding down some gravel road. Still more straight gravel roads. Here we are nearing the end of said gravel road. And look at that beautiful lake. Beautiful blue to match the beautiful blue sky. Speaking of which, the weather was surprisingly nice on this day. back home in Barrie, it had snowed the day before, so I was feeling pretty pessimistic about the weather, and in the end, I ended up being quite overdressed and regretting my clothing choices towards the end of the day, as it was sunny and warm, and the hard effort meant I was close to overheating. Speaking of hard efforts, this section here of Farmer's Field was probably another effort that I ended up regretting later in the race. With some soggy conditions in the week leading up to the event, plus hundreds of riders, the field got quite chopped up and was boggy and muddy. My ego and sense that, I have mad cyclocross skills meant that I pushed myself to ride through all the boggy, muddy sections, probably taking more out of my legs than I really should have. But who wants to dismount their bike in a bike race? In the end, just pushing up this hill out of the saddle, rear tires slipping, barely making it over without having to put a foot down. Picking lines through this boggy section. I think there were some pylons where the race organizers wanted us to ride, but clearly everybody ignored those and tried to pick and choose their own line. At this point, the boggy field was so sticky and just a drag that riding was barely quicker than the alternative of walking or running. See, many people have gone off their bikes. That one guy over there is running ahead. So despite me continuing to ride, I'm not really making up on ground on the guys who decided to run for this section. I don't imagine if I had dismounted, I would have been running, because running would have been an extra drain on the legs. So I'm probably glad that I did continue to ride through this. Alongside all of the straight roads and rail trail, there are a couple technical sections of the course, like this one here, which gave me all those fall cyclocross feels. Just rode down this flowy descent. Really wishing there was a bit more of this on the course, because that would make it truly spectacular. As we get back on the road, around the start of the 40-kilometer course, thus all the cars on the road. Into the second half of the race is when the things get real challenging, as you face the two notorious mud chutes. These are downhill sections of trail that, no matter what the weather is like, just turn into absolute mud pits. You're either lucky or skilled if you're able to ride down the whole things. The first and longest of the two was a thick peanut butter-like mud by the time I reached it. I like to imagine that the fast guys at the front of the race have an easy time riding down this, because no one else has touched it. But by the time a couple hundred sets of wheels have cut through, it's a different story. As you can see, I did my best to ride as far as possible, and eventually joined the herd of people pushing their bikes down. Such a heavy, sticky mud. It was pretty hard to carry your bike down there, as it just built up in weight, and you were greeted by a group of men with power washers who helped remove some of the mud from your bike and get you going again. The final of the two mud chutes is the notorious Pow Reline Mud Chute, which is within the final about 3 kilometers of the race. Not as long as the first one, but steeper, often deeper mud, and has a couple root drops in it that become notorious for sending people over the bars. Once again, decided I was going to do my best to ride as much as this as possible. No one wants to get off, waste more energy pushing the bike. And by this point in this race, I was feeling the early signs of cramp. And while I was sending it down this chute, I suddenly lost the front wheel and went down. I mean, you can't really say you did Paris Ancaster without crashing in the mud chute. And of course, that crash in the deepest mud added a interesting challenging to the last couple kilometers of the race. Mostly the added weight of a couple pounds of mud crammed into my front brake lever and splattered across my handlebars and gunked up all over my shoes, as well as all the mud that went into my front brake and on my brake lever, which made using the front brake pretty close to impossible. But I managed to navigate my way down the rest of the Pow Reline chute through the last little bit of mud and back onto the road. Luckily, there aren't too many more times that you need to brake, since the final kilometer of Paris Ancaster is the infamous Martin Road climb. As the road ends and you turn onto Martin's Road, you know you're nearing the end of the 70 kilometers of Paris Ancaster, but there's still one more daunting challenge ahead of you. One final climb with pitches up to 16 kilometers. Of course, by this point, it's not surprising to see people walking and pushing broken bikes or just unable to turn the pedals anymore. At this point, I was determined to ride all the way up the climb. On my first 2 attempts at Paris Ancaster, I had to dismount both times. And I knew this time, if I got off my bike, I'd probably be overwhelmed by cramp and struggle even to walk up the hill. So I was thankful once again to have the 42 tooth cog in the back, which gave me a plenty low enough climbing gear to grind my way up this final climb. Wasn't pretty. I was dancing and bobbing all over the bike, just trying to keep things moving forward on the steep pitches of this climb. See many people who resigned to the defeat of pushing their way up the climb. Everybody in their lowest gears, grinding away or standing up on their pedals. Even this guy on the fat bike didn't have the gears to make it up this climb. But if it's so close to the finish, plenty of people come out to line the course and cheer on the riders as they take on the last 100 or so meters, adding extra motivation to finish or shame to those who decide to dismount and walk the last section. Still pushing away, not wanting to quit, still believing I was going to make it in under that 3-hour goal I had set. From what I could still see of my mud-caked Wahoo screen, I was well within that time cut. It was about 2 hours and 55 minutes, according to the elapsed time on my computer, as I continued to ride, with the sweat dripping into my eyes in the warm afternoon sun, as I was overdressed and undoing all my zippers to try to find a bit of relief. And as the road began to level out, you start to feel a bit better, you start pushing harder, knowing that the finish line will be in sight in mere seconds. As you round this final slight bend, as the lines of the crowd open up, you can finally see the finishing banner, a welcome sign of relief. After 70 hard kilometers of gravel, mud, and this year headwinds, you cross the finish line and you think you've accomplished your goal, but then you check the final results and it turns out you finished in 3 hours, 1 minute, and 46 seconds. 1 minute and 46 seconds past your goal of 3 hours. So that means, folks, I still have unfinished business with this race. So I'll be seeing you again in 2020.